the Energodar city. 2 people were injured in general. Starting from April, as a result of the Ukrainian strikes of Energodar and the Zaporozhye NPP, 9 personnel members have died and many were injured. These were civilian specialists. The Kiev regime attacking Energodar is deliberately approaching the nuclear blackmail, jeopardizing the security situation of Europe and the whole world. The tragic consequences of Ukrainian shelling that led to injuring civilians and destruction of civilian infrastructure have been recorded in the Republic of Adygea, Stavropol, Bryansk, Voronezh, Rostov, and Samara, and we continue to record these acts. Our investigative bodies continue to bring to justice the functionaries of the Kiev regime, their militants, the command of the FU, foreign mercenaries. On August 21st, British citizen James O'Connor was sentenced to 29 years in prison, serving the first 8 years in prison and the rest in a maximum security penal colony for smuggling weapons, participating in the incursion in the Kursk region, and killing a Russian citizen in the DPR. As far as the incursion of the Kursk region goes, 35 mercenaries have been sentenced, including in absentia. They participated in this incursion in August 2024, in April 2025, including citizens of Georgia, the US, New Zealand, Lithuania, Britain, and other countries. Now let's talk about Western journalists. During the last briefing, we talked about a despicable stunt of German journalist of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, Michael Martens. I remind you that during the press conference in Belgrade on August 8th, he said about a possibility, and I quote him, of facilitating the killing of Russians. The journalist has been accused of a crime provided for by Part 2, Article 282 of the Penal Code of the Russian Federation, incitement to hatred or hostility. He has been declared internationally wanted, and the Basmanny District Court accused him in absentia, and he was remanded in custody. And who's sponsoring all of this? On August 24th, Kiev hosted the Coalition of the Willing meeting, timed to coincide with another anniversary of the Ukrainian independence, which Ukraine is now losing. It has demonstrated the real situation, the real rift in the West, and demonstrated who is really sponsoring international extremism and terrorism. Only the newly appointed British Prime Minister Andy Burnham risked to visit Kiev. He attended this meeting personally. The rest attended through video conference. Macron, Merz participated through video conference. The main result of this gathering was the recognition that they must prepare for the fragmentation and occupation of the Ukrainian territory. You heard it right. They're saying that they are strategically defeating Russia, but they are now trying to disintegrate Ukraine. In their communique, they declared the creation of multinational contingent deployment under the guise of the ceasefire control forces. Exercises have been declared for October-November in the border areas between Ukraine and the EU countries. These countries are allegedly trying to settle the conflict and are trying to get their place at the negotiation table. We have been underscoring many times that any foreign contingents that are preventing the durable peace are unacceptable, and they will become legitimate targets, and the responsibility will be with those who has made the decision to further escalate the conflict. Some parts of the communique were the reason why many were surprised, and I quote them. The readiness of Zelensky to start negotiation. This is against the backdrop of the decree of Zelensky himself, number 679 of September 30th, 2022, where he prohibited negotiating with the leadership of Russia. He is ready, but no one knows for what. Specialist Nicole was mentioning the facilities of the cultural heritage, including the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra, which is especially cynical because now the Kiev regime is now legitimately taking measures for the forced seizure of churches from communities by canceling their permanent usage rights. On the day of the coalition meeting, shocking details of the bloodshed in the Svetogorsk Holy Mission Lavra became known, where radicals killed monk Varsanofi and injured 2 monks. At the same time, the AFU shelled the Epiphany Cathedral in the town of Gorlovka in the DPR. For some reason, the communique of the Coalition of the Willing did not reflect these facts. Why? In the past, we would say that they are not engaging in any humanitarian issues, neither in church issues. Now, well, they are focusing on it more, but please make sure to look at the facts. The AFU shelled the Epiphany Cathedral in the town of Gorlovka, injuring 4 people. 2 of them were the priests, the humane participants of the so-called coalition. No one of the humane participants of the coalition has mentioned anything about these crimes. We have heard about new financial support for Kiev to support its destabilized regime, its military-industrial complex, armed formations. There is a zero efficiency of its systems. And the president of the U.S., Donald Trump's rhetoric has changed. Well, the British-French tandem has declared a new program, Freya, escalation. Zelensky was forced to declare bankruptcy. He said that the war became more expensive, and the search for means has become the main challenge for the existence of the regime and its survival. But we're going to talk about it in detail. We're going to talk about the mobilization. The visit culminated in a sacrilegious act. The European leaders, headed by the British Prime Minister and the head of the European Council, Antonio Costa, were transported to the military memorial cemetery, where they both bowed their heads in honor of ancestors of sons and grandsons of Nazi collaborators. They participated in honoring neo-Nazis, stood in solidarity with the policy of rewriting history, legalizing Nazism, glorification of criminals, and destroying historical memory. The U.S. representatives have ignored this event. Recently, Zelensky recognized that he misinformed Donald Trump regarding the readiness of the SpaceX leadership to give green light to using the Starlink satellite system to strike inland Russia. Said that the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense gave him unfounded data. Maybe as far as Bucha goes, the data was also not proven. Maybe those victims weren't there. So it does not surprise us, because the Kiev regime is lying about everything that's happening on the daily basis. Now, Zelensky made the same mistake, and Donald Trump had the opportunity to make conclusions. Now, I'd like to talk separately about the destructive role of the leaders of France, Germany, and Britain. They are stoking the Ukrainian crisis even further. I'd like to note, on separate note, the destructive role of the Euro Troika, leaders of France, Germany, and Britain. Germany is now dreaming about creating, and I quote German officials, members of the government, they dream about the creation of the strongest army in Europe. The French and the British are announcing steps to transfer to Zelensky military technology, and Burnham, when in Kiev, underscored the continuity of the anti-Russian course of London and confirmed that the Britain transferred to the AFU long-range destructive means and gave Kiev technological data so that they can independently assemble scalp cruise missiles, Storm Shadow missiles, at Ukrainian enterprises, where the labor force is way cheaper than in Europe. Then, a bit later, we will be talking about it in more detail. By the way, a similar step of the transfer of technology was announced but not implemented by President of France, Emmanuel Macron. Of course, we've been recording all these actions. We've also seen the article in the Figaro newspaper where referring to the Saffron French concern, said that for more than a year now, that concern has been supplying guidance system for Ukrainian British Flamingo cruise missile and navigation equipment and other systems for facilitating the strikes on Russia. London and Paris are frantically trying to remove responsibility from themselves, but they are directly responsible for these terrorist attacks. They should realize, all of them, not only those who are making these decisions, but also those who are implementing them in the West, that this is playing with fire and the consequences can not be forecast. British Prime Minister is going on and on about supporting Zelensky as long as needed, and I'm quoting him directly. At the same time, the London newspapers are forecasting a very bad final for the current Ukrainian leadership. The Sunday Times describing the current year as the most complex for Zelensky, the complicated year. Corruption scandals, the power vertical has ceased to be monolithic, the attrition of resources, the domestic policy of Ukraine has transformed in a fierce dictatorship where there are no constitutional rights for the citizens. This dictatorship has been justified by war, but the leadership is afraid of people and their fury. Recently, Zelensky has recognized that he's afraid of democratic procedures. He said that holding elections right now, allegedly, and I'm quoting him, will be a tsunami for the state that will divide Ukraine. So he's now beginning to understand that he and his servant of the people, servant of Zelensky himself, are hated by people. This is not blind hate. This is the real fury, because the Ukrainian people has been lied to, has been raped, and now is killed. Earlier, one advisor of the office of the president, Mr. Podolak, when giving an interview to Italian newspaper La Repubblica, excluded holding any election campaign because he said that it was not possible to ensure security.
It's somewhat strange, taking into account they are talking about the strongest army in Ukraine allegedly. It's strange that they are visited by all kinds of guests from abroad who guarantee them this security, and In different places, we hear statements by Western leaders. They are ready to guarantee the security of Ukraine, but it's dangerous to hold elections in Ukraine. It's clear why. The result is predictable. The forced mobilization in Ukraine is underway. It's just beastly, brutal campaign. For the Zelensky regime, it's the only way to remain in power and physically to preserve themselves somehow. Now let us have a look at this brutal mobilization a little bit in detail. It's just beastly, it's inhumane. Because honestly, not every beast has such hatred towards those it can consider of its own kind, compatriots. It's just brutality, inhumane behavior, madness of those mobilization campaigns in Ukraine, of those territorial centers, so-called. Those methods were directly borrowed from Nazis of the Great Patriotic War times. In Odessa, some citizens who locked themselves in their cars in order to evade this illegal mobilization, and they started to pump tear gas into those vehicles, just creating real gas chambers literally on the streets of Odessa. But you know, there are, it's just, I'm not talking about conscience of the Kiev regime, it's absent clearly, but maybe some, just some traces of conscience should remain in Ukraine among those who can take decisions. Another symbol of the Ukrainian recruitment centers' inhumanity is the tragedy in Lviv. A body of a man was found in the Zakharova district. He had fallen ill during his detention, and the medics who have arrived were unable to rescue him, to bring him to life, and his wife suffered a severe medical crisis. And one more resident in Lviv injured the recruitment officer and inflicted him a fatal knife wound. The attacker was killed. He died at the scene from this injury. That's what Gogol mentioned in his work. The writer, who is so much hated by the Kiev regime. They are trying to deprive people of his works in the Russian language. It's just brother-killing tragedy that is underway in Ukraine. They're just not fighting, but they're just destroying themselves. They have long begun to do that. A group of locals in Vinnytsia with shovels and brooms rescued a fellow citizen, a fellow resident from the Ukrainian recruitment offices. Just we can recall the words of Dmitry Kuleba, Ukrainian former foreign minister. He said that when Ukrainians ran out of weapons, they would go to war with shovels. But he did not precise against whom they will go to war with shovels. On the evening of the 25th of August in Ternopil, a crowd of young people rose against forced mobilization, and recruitment officers were injured. One of them was evacuated by the police who arrived and those young men and women in Ukraine. They understand what is happening. They're just not feeling, they're analyzing the announcements regarding the lowering of recruitment age. They marched along the streets. And it was an information campaign that was to prepare the society for the idea of mobilizing women. Alexei Reznikov, former Ukrainian defense minister, participated in this campaign. He proposed to legally mobilize the entire adult population in Ukraine, including women. But taking into account the gender ideas have been adopted by Ukraine from the West, it's not clear exactly who he meant by women. Reznikov proposes to send women to rear echelon roles and to redeploy men to the front lines. But what is happening in the life of Reznikov himself? Two daughters of his do not hurry to go to the front line. They are engaged in interesting creative projects, just getting some unbelievable sums of the budget funds for their projects and so on. So that's the same thing. Just have a look what is happening with those relatives, close relatives of Zelensky's, where they are. Just those representatives of the regime, they just laughed when answering questions about their own plans in the participation in the Ukrainian defense, and not hiding the transportation of their own relatives abroad. Now they are working to lower the mobilization age threshold for Ukrainian young men. And this is again underscored in the statements of Alexander Koltunovich, a Ukrainian member of parliament. He noted that the Ukrainian parliament is currently incapable, it's a direct quote, incapable of anything other than helping Ukrainians burn in hell, end of quote. But Russian culture does not allow them just to feel as complete beasts. And they just destroy anything that just puts some obstacles to their beastly logic. They distract attention from real problems, and maybe just because of his black heart, Zelensky resorted to attacking Russian culture. He imposed sanctions. Actually, it's known to everyone. Creators of Masha and the Bear animated series, and now it will be success on the front, actually, obviously. They block all their social media accounts of this Masha and the Bear. That's what is to demonstrate their power, to enshrine his legitimacy, to underline his power. But the West, having counted and sadly counted, they're starting to guess what those Ukrainian migrants have done. They just put an end to programs that support those who left Ukraine as refugees, as some miserable migrants. They just stopped cynically. And all this story is moved towards Ukrainian mobilization. Markus Lammert, the EU Commission spokesperson, confirmed the introduction of restrictions, and now the Ukrainians are obliged to documentarily confirm, both men and women, that they are not evading service in the armed forces of Ukraine. Switzerland recently joined these harsh measures, restricting the issuance of migration status to individuals with unresolved military registration issues in Ukraine. So, what do you think? It's just a powerful story for the Western Europeans. So the European Commission answered the relevant questions, categorically refusing to react to Kyiv's urgent request for additional financial aid. I would remind you that Zelensky requested 220 million euros to subsidize interest loans for small and medium-sized farmers facing bankruptcy. Markus Lammert said there will not be additional funding and suggested instead that Kyiv survive using existing mechanisms. So what mechanisms do they have? Forced mobilization? If a farmer is not content with the lack of compensation for his losses, so go ahead to that bus with man catchers, and that will get rid of those problems. It will be a guarantee. So they just ready to subsidize only war for the Ukrainians to be slaughtered, not for their farms, but for the interests of the Westerners. Under the guise of the so-called Independence Day gift, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced the approval of 6.1 billion euros for weapons procurement for the Ukrainian army. But why not to relocate this money for Ukrainian farmers? Zelensky requested 220 million euros. Ursula von der Leyen just approved 30 times more. She approved 6.1 billion euros. So if it's 30 times more for farmers, just one bit, 1/30 could be allocated to the Ukrainian farmers. Of course, no. There is no such need for Brussels, only the need of slaughter. For that they always have the money. And this money is 6 billion. Kyiv will not receive them directly. They will go to the European Union defense companies, while Ukraine receives weapons in exchange for strictly audited contracts. They are called actually strictly audited. It's hell of a corruption in Ukraine actually. So that's interrelation with the West, such loans under the guise of a gift, an Independence Day gift. So they fail to keep pace with their own plans. The crisis affected the joint defense projects. The Flamingo solid rocket fuel plant, its construction in Denmark has been postponed to late 2027, and initially they planned to complete it by the end of 2026. And the costs have grown, you would not believe it, to 150 million euros due to construction delays and managerial chaos. Now the Black Sea region. As Zelensky shouted, and as they said in Brussels and other Western capitals, grain to be transported for the world not to suffer from food security problems. But now, after those 4 years of lamentations, what has happened? Zelensky continues to create a threat for Black Sea region states. The Romanian exclusive economic zone has been violated by the Ukrainian unmanned surface vessel. It's 18 nautical miles east of Constanța. The Romanian Air Force engaged 2 F-16 fighter jets and spotted the Ukrainian maritime drone, destroyed it from an onboard cannon. It's actually not the first time for Romania to be affected by those unmanned vessels from Ukraine. Some vessels operated by Turkish companies were attacked in the Black Sea. Nisibe dry cargo ship was attacked, and the 47-year-old crew member, Turkish national İlker Razolu, was killed, and 8 other crew members were wounded. So you can see that those mechanisms are turning against NATO countries themselves. These are the consequences of the reckless military supplies to the Kiev regime. The armed forces of Ukraine have struck 214 civilian vessels, flying the flags of various nations in the Black Sea this year. It's a cynical lie. What can be sold, what can be illegally taken, that is all used on Bankova. People are dying, and the Kiev regime continues to reveal its neo-Nazi essence. That's taken into account the perverse nature of Zelensky himself. It's the Hitler's forces destroying people in Bila Cerkva in Kiev region in 1941. It was mass extermination of children. Even Waffen SS fighters refused to kill those children, but to do that, to kill young children, 90 children, they were killed by Ukrainian nationalist collaborators. And now the ideological hairs of those atrocities are buried in Ukrainian military memorial cemeteries. And Europeans are invited to lay flowers at their graves. Zelensky is now heading this process, laying flowers to collaborators' memorials, to Nazi memorials. It's not only the betrayal of the memory of what his grandfather, Semyon Zelensky, fought for. That's how he is attempting to reshape the conscience of Ukrainians who, unlike Zelensky, have no assets, no possibility to leave Ukraine And I would repeat, the tragedy of Zelensky and his family would be his tragedy. But he's trying to make the Ukrainian people swear allegiance to this neo-Nazism and the Nazis from those times. According to Zelensky, who is much quoted by the Israeli mass media, his great-grandfather, he was killed by those Nazis during the occupation of Ukraine. And Zelensky signed a decree to attribute the title of the hero of Ukraine to Andrei Belitsky, a racist and founder of the terrorist nationalist Azov battalion. His record includes this so-called hero of Ukraine, leading the far-right Social National Assembly, participation in the extremist right sector. Now, there is currently the 3rd Army Corps of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, formed on the basis of this Azov unit. They gained notoriety for openly expressing Nazi ideas, using Nazi symbols, and expressing misanthropic, racist ideas. All this has been also mentioned by Leonid Kuchma back in 2003. That was the first who ordered to fire upon Russian soldiers. So, thanks to Kuchma, he has written such a book, Ukraine is not Russia. In 2010, wearing the St. George ribbon, he declared on camera, and I quote his words, "I will never agree, given that my father died fighting against Nazism and Hitler's Germany, to Bandera or Shukhevich holding the title of Hero of Ukraine." Back in 2010, Kuchma said, "It is simply inhumane." And those who do that fully understand that they are driving a wedge between people and nations. Not only must we refuse to accept this, but we must ensure it never happens again, so that no one is tempted to build a political career on such a thing. End of quote. So that's what Kuchma said in 2010. So in 2026, he keeps silent, but maybe he will also go and lay flowers to those burials of the remains of those punishers and collaborators.
Today, Kuchma approves the policies of Zelensky on rewriting history. He stands in solidarity with him and with his measures aimed at glorifying OUN, UPA. He has returned to Poland the Order of the White Eagle and boasts about personally giving orders to shoot at Russians. All the aforementioned facts confirm the relevance of the task to identify and demilitarize Ukraine and to eliminate threats emanating from its territory. And these goals will be achieved. Now, as promised, let's talk in detail about Britain giving intelligence data to produce Scalp Storm Shadow missiles in Ukraine. There has been a lot of information about these acts and these actions. I've given you a brief information. Now let's talk about it in more detail. This is the essence of London's involvement in Ukrainian conflict. The decision to deliver these missiles to the Kiev regime was adopted by the British in 2023. They were back then in the euphoria of preparations for what turned out to be a failed counteroffensive. Many British politicians considered that decision to be extraordinary. The government of the United Kingdom recognized that it was dangerous, illegitimate, and tried to convince its parliamentaries, its citizens, and even us that it was acting responsibly, and officially said that the system would be used, and I quote them directly, only on the internationally recognized territory of Ukraine. That stance was recorded in the corresponding note of the British embassy to Moscow. At that time, the British were trying to demonstrate that London was preserving a modicum of common sense and did not want to unleash the Third World War. Later on, the British side was trying to evade answering the question on real usage of Storm Shadow missiles, but at some point it was evident that those missiles were used against Russia. Such strikes later on went beyond the claimed operational area. However fictitious it may have been, which is not possible without direct participation of foreign specialists ensuring the operation and targeting of this weapon system. And of course, it also is not possible without granting by certain countries of NATO necessary intelligence data for the AFU. In May 2024, the then head of Foreign Office, David Cameron, interviewed by Reuters agency, said that Ukraine had the right to strike inland Russia using British weapons and armaments. And I directly quote him, like Russia has the right to strike inland Ukraine. I'd like to use a direct quote in English to convince everyone that he said that. The Ukraine, he said, has the right just as Russia is striking inside Ukraine. And this is the direct quote. This hostile act directly contradicted previous official assurances of the British side that under no circumstances will Storm Shadow missiles be used on Russian territory. At the same time, by doing that, the British Foreign Secretary deliberately disavowed this principle, recognizing de facto his country, the party to the conflict. Now we're here that London is ready to transfer to Kiev the intelligence data necessary to independently produce Storm Shadow missiles. The government of Andy Burnham understand what it will lead to, how AFU militants could use Storm Shadow missiles if they have this opportunity to replenish their arsenals. What our servicemen, of course, will not allow, but to pose the responsibility on Kiev puppets will not be possible. It's also noteworthy to see the attempts of London's politicians to remove the concerns by these escalatory actions among their own populations. The local newspapers started to call the Scalp missile, that very same missile, well, they started to call it Scalp, not Storm Shadow, trying to cover their tracks and to put the responsibility on the Frenchmen. They are glorifying this provocatory step and are saying that there is nothing escalatory about it. Well, the recent events do not leave any doubts that all the steps by the government of the United Kingdom only are aimed at the only long-term goal to strategically defeat our country. As they say, these attempts are doomed to fail. We have repeatedly said that our response to Ukrainian strikes using the British weapons may be all the military facilities and equipment of Britain in Ukraine and beyond. The people who are in charge of these attacks against the civilians will be punished according to their crimes. Inevitable retribution will also befall their accomplices and instigators. We call upon all the citizens of the United Kingdom to think about the inevitable catastrophic consequences of these hostile steps of their own authorities. We call upon the British leadership to clearly analyze the situation and to immediately and decisively and unambiguously refuse the hostile aggressive line that can only prolong the agony of the Kiev neo-Nazi regime and which creates the conflict, a new nature of the conflict, elevates it to the new level. Well, now let's talk about German newspapers that talk about multiple deserters that flee training areas in Germany. We have been talking about it since the beginning of 2022. We talked about it even earlier, in 2014. All those Maidan revolutions had been trained on similar campsites in the Baltic states, in Poland, and now we see that they are now trained in Germany, or have been trained for many years now. And this is happening in the very center, as they say, of the democratic European paradise. The Ukrainians are deserting there in Germany. I'd like to ask, how can the European Union explain the situation? I'd like to remind you of the words of the Kiev propaganda. The Kiev authorities were saying to Europeans that it was necessary to provide more funds for Ukraine because the Ukraine itself, according to Zelensky and his clique, will protect Western Europeans from Russia. Allegedly, because allegedly the Kiev army is the strongest one. They just need more money. Now, this self-proclaimed defenders of this flowering garden from the allegedly barbaric and violent Russia are fleeing, deserting from campsites in Germany. These are not hostilities that we are talking about. This is not an emergency. This is just an exercise. At a campsite, they're deserting this training. Who's going to defend Germany, as they're saying, Poland, the Baltic countries, maybe even France and Italy, from anyone whatsoever? These so-called defenders from the ranks of the AFU and security services to see that they're fleeing the training camps, let alone the battlefield. First and foremost, Die Zeit newspaper was brave enough and was able to go beyond the myth about the valiant Ukrainian servicemen and shed light on the unpleasant situation linked with the manning process of the armed forces of Ukraine. Second, and it is evident, the deserting Ukrainians clearly demonstrated that they don't want to fight for the idea of Ukrainianness in its neo-Nazi guise, for the corrupted authorities of the Zelensky, for the European values. They were enlisted forcefully, not of their own free will. They were trained in Germany so that they can be later used as cannon fodder on the battlefield. This is interesting and should be interesting for those who don't know any history. 85 years ago, in Germany and in Western Europe, Ukrainians were fleeing concentration camps, tortures, where they were put forcibly because they were fighting against Nazism. They were fleeing, they were mounting riots, and they were tortured, shut down, but some people succeeded and fled and survived. But 85 years have passed since that time. And what is happening now? Now Ukrainians are sent to Central Europe, allegedly on a voluntary basis, to learn about the practices of the prospering Europe so that it can later be used by them under neo-Nazi banners, so that it can later be used against their previous compatriots, the sons and grandsons of those who, together with their, well, grandsons and grandfathers and fathers, fought against neo-Nazism. Now they're fleeing these training sites. in the very same manner in which they were fleeing concentration camp. It's an irony of history. Another important aspect, these cases of desertion are multiple. We're not talking about a specific serviceman who, well, has demonstrated his personal character. This is a growing trend. Everyone realizes what the situation is, so people desert if they can. The Die Zeit newspaper says that only in the federal land Saxony-Anhalt since 2022, over 80 Ukrainian servicemen have fled. And across Germany, a couple hundred cases have been recorded. In Ukraine, these deserters will be punished to 12 years in prison, but they are risking it and trying to find refuge in the European Union countries. The DPA agency said that the leadership of Bundeswehr has confirmed the cases of systematic desertship of Ukrainian servicemen from German campsites, but Bundeswehr cynically refused to participate in their search and said that this deserting situation was the domestic affair of the AFU. The situation does not require any special commentary. Bringing deserters back into the legal fold and determining their legal status is the domestic matter and affair of Germany. So in these circumstances, journalists would be wiser to address this question to the German authorities. Could this servicemen who have fled to receive the legal status in the EU, taking into account the statement of the Euro Commission's representative, Mr. Lammert? He said that there was a need for every Ukrainian asking for asylum to confirm that they're not dodging the draft. Well, this meat grinder of the conflict just requires new victims. This is evident. The neo-Nazi ideologies of Ukraine, sponsored by the West, is demonstrated in the science sector. The Kiev authorities are trying to unlawfully appropriate research findings of Russian archaeologists in Crimea. They were trying to do that during the 25th International Congress of Byzantine Studies that is taking place on August 24th to 29th in Vienna. Initially, Russian academician of the Russian Academy of Science, professor and chairman of the National Committee of Byzantinists, Sergei Karpov, was going to participate in this event, but he, on certain grounds, abstained from visiting Vienna. Which is noteworthy is that a couple of days prior to the forum, the Kiev court handed down a ruling saying that it was necessary to seize scientific materials of Russian delegates of Congress and sent corresponding requests to the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Austria that was going to enforce it, allegedly. Effectively, we remember in this regard the recent incident with the detention in Poland, the Ukrainian request Russian archaeologist Alexander Butagin. So this is a deliberate hunt in the West for Russian scientists. They should be really careful when visiting the international events like that. Now over to Moldova. On August 24th, Moldova celebrated the 82nd anniversary of the liberation of the Republic for the Romanian fascist occupiers. On the eve of this day, the patriotic forces of the country organized a number of festive events, a liberation and peace march with a wreath-laying ceremony at the Eternity Memorial in Chisinau, scientific and practical conferences, commemorative events, as well as literary evenings featuring documentary film footage and memories of the veterans of the victorious battles of August 1944. The Chisinau regime demonstrated its true neo-Nazi core. It has ignored this remarkable date for the history and refused to light the eternal flame at the Sherpin Bridge head. It was right there where 82 years ago fierce battles were held that predefined the result of the remarkable Jassy Chisinau offensive. We've talked about it in detail, and we'll give all the necessary links to the text version of our briefing. In Moldova, this act was called petty and mean, but those Moldovans who care, who think that this date was a symbol of bravery, national unity, independently lit candles in memory of heroes, liberators of their motherland. On the eve of August 24th, and on that day, the Moldovan authorities illuminated the parliament building in the colors of the Ukrainian flag and the Arch of Triumph in the downtown Chisinau, because on that day it was the Ukrainian Independence Day. In Chisinau, they found money for Eternal Flame. They found money to illuminate the building, but they didn't find any funds to commemorate those who did everything for the current Moldova to exist. They also opened an exhibition dedicated to churches and other cultural heritage facilities destroyed or allegedly damaged by Russia. Well, it shows what is more important for the Moldovan authorities now: to commemorate anti-fascist soldiers who laid down their lives on the altar of victory, or servicing the geopolitical interests of this short-term interested people. Well, we are going to give all the links about the atrocities that are now taking place in Ukraine against the Orthodox Church in Ukraine. The official Chisinau is trying to get involved, is getting involved even deeper to service the needs of the criminal regime of Zelensky and its external handlers, sacrificing the interests of the Moldovan people. How else could you explain the decision taken by the Moldovan authorities to grant to Ukraine, starting from August 10th until the end of the year, a 50% discount to supply grains to Romania? Maybe it was the reason why Mayosanda and Zelensky exchanged state awards of their countries, the Order of the Republic and the Order of the Princess Olga. The same thing is seen with regard to numerous concessions of Moldova's sovereignty in favor of Romania. We see crisis tendencies in the economy of the Republic. They're handing over the country's entire economic sector to interests from Bucharest. In December 2023, the head of the National Bank of Moldova became ex-minister of finance of Romania, Anca Dragu. The anti-money laundering services was headed by Daniel Maris Staicu, and other certain cases were also recorded. August 25th in media, we saw information about appointment of Minister of Economic Development and Digitalization of Moldova, of Deputy of the Parliament, former Minister of Economy of Romania, Claudiu Nesu. At the same time, the decree to give a Moldovan citizen was signed by Maio Sandu on the very same day. Thus, the pro-Western forces of the Republic acknowledged their own incompetence and showed that there are no decent candidates for this post within the country. So they are just selling their own country to another state.
The people of Moldova just deny those initiatives aimed against people by the authorities of Moldova, whose aim is to destroy the identity, because the Moldovans honor the deeds of their generations, of their ancestors, and are not prepared to make any concessions. An announcement about a humanitarian event, but a very interesting one. The Atomic Cities Organization, supported by Rosatom State Corporation, implement the Atomic Dictation International Educational Project. This showcases Russia's achievements in energy, medicine, Arctic and space exploration, and it forms interest among young people, interest in engineering professions. The preparation, training of engineering specialists is of strategic importance. It is crucial to expand knowledge, to demonstrate the achievements. And this atomic dictation format creates a unique format, and it unites institutions, communities, and of course families. In 2025, the atomic dictation engaged over 120,000 participants. In 2026, it's of a new format. It will be a month of atomic knowledge, and competitors can join online or take the dictation in person at a registered venue. The detailed information, as it is customary, will be provided in the text version of this briefing, so we do invite you to join traditionally. Now, elections to the Parliament of the Republic of Kazakhstan on the 23rd of August this year. The first elections of the one-chamber parliament took place. The Russian observer commissions were included executive committee and the parliamentary CIS assembly, so those elections can be considered just and competitive, and they have allowed the implementation of the rights of all the citizens of the Republic for free will. And the Adalet party secured a confident victory. 17% of the Kazakhstan citizens voted for that Adalet party. It's widespread support for the policy of stability conducted by the current government and the protection of the interests of the Republic at the international stage. Now we draw your attention to the ODIHR OSCE Observer Report with unjustified criticism of the elections. So they continue their biased approach towards state, as they say, to the east of Vienna. We reaffirm our fundamental commitment to further strengthening our multifaceted cooperation, including parliamentary cooperation, in which both chambers of the Federal Assembly are to play an active role, and I am ready to answer your questions. Is International Life, Международная жизнь with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. We would like to hear your comment regarding the announced and somehow imposed by the U.S. authorities secondary sanctions against the Islamic Republic of Iran. As it is well known, Russia categorically rejects the practice of employing unilateral coercive measures that counter the UN Charter. It's yet another illegal initiative, and we will coordinate our efforts to counter it together with our core thinkers. It has long been turned into an instrument to punish those who are unfavorable for the collective West, those states that are unfavorable unfavorable. So thank you. Thank you. Is RIA Novosti with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. If you allow us, we have two questions today. I am RIA Novosti correspondent. Our first question is about the situation in Armenia. It's the new wave of persecution against opposition political forces gaining momentum in Armenia. How would you comment on this? Naturally, we do not interfere in the Republic's internal affairs. We still consider Armenia a fraternal country with whom we share special relations, so we cannot remain indifferent to the political processes that take place there, especially if they're connected with our country, with our bilateral relations and so on. Unfortunately, the negative trend highlighted by President Vladimir Putin during his meeting with Nikol Pashinyan on the 1st of April. This is an escalation of repressions, real repressions against political forces who advocate for maintaining and strengthening aligned relations with Russia. It's the development of bilateral ties that has been demonstrated during the parliamentary elections held in June.
Власти республики резко контрастируют с публичными уверениями официального Еревана о том, что там не предпринимают шагов для ухудшения, как они заверяют, отношений с Россией. Ожидаем, что политические партии и блоки, руководители муниципального уровня, общественники, активисты Армении, которые прилагают усилия для укрепления традиционного двустороннего взаимодействия, смогут спокойно принимать участие во внутриполитической жизни страны, вносить свой вклад в ее развитие, процветание. Ну и, конечно, показательно, что ужесточение давления на конструктивно настроенных к нашей стране политиков и общественников обходят молчанием те политические силы, которые, как они утверждают, это их буквально прямая цитата, несут демократию в Армению, прежде всего представители, конечно, Европейского Союза. Но мне кажется, это лишнее подтверждение того, что новые так называемые друзья армянских властей продолжают закрывать глаза на все, что хоть как-то способствует достижению ЕСовских целей применительно к Армении, а именно цинично использовать республику, ее потенциал и ее граждан в своем противостоянии с Россией.
Спасибо большое. И следующий вопрос у нас касается, как бы вы могли прокомментировать сообщение СМИ о том, что в австрийском городе Леоберсдорф на месте бывшего филиала концлагеря Маутхаузен планируется построить супермаркет?
Да, действительно, такая информация есть, и, увы, она подтверждается. Это информация о том, что планы строительства логистического центра и супермаркета в австрийском городке Леоберсдорф на территории одного из концлагерей, входивших в систему лагеря смерти Маутхаузен, уже перешли в стадию практической реализации. В связи с этим хотелось бы обратить внимание на одиозное заключение австрийского ведомства по охране памятников. Оно отказалось придать этой территории защитный статус ввиду якобы недостаточности материальных свидетельств существования концлагеря. Ну, я не знаю, если в этом мире есть понятие определения цинизма и примеры, которые могут подтвердить цинизм, я думаю, это лучший. То есть австрийского для вот упомянутого мною австрийского ведомства оказалась недостаточной, не знаю, или неубедительной, документально подтвержденная информация о том, что в этом самом месте с сентября 1944 года по апрель 1945 существовал концлагерь, в котором содержалось около
Are there any difficulties with that, and will the ODIH
So literally the entire group was there in the building.
Indian nationals there who have sought our assistance for evacuation. Of them, 95 are in Darchen and currently proceeding to Hilsa to cross over into Nepal. 4 are in Geelong city, 13 Zutulpuk, and they are en route to the town of Saga, and 60, 70 others who are also heading towards Saga. Our mission is in touch with local authorities, and they are doing their best for their rescue.